to This Week in Somalia and the World from ADN TV studios in Nairobi, Kenya. Today we are joined by Omar Mahmood, a senior analyst for Somalia from the International Crisis Group. Omar is going to talk to us about Somalia's elections. Let's start with a general one. What do you think of the conduct of the election so far?
I think the conduct's been pretty terrible. I think that's documented quite well. There's been very significant manipulation throughout the process. I mean, we saw that starting in the upper house, but it wasn't very surprising given the dynamics around upper house selection. But then to see that spill over into the lower house, I think it's been a little bit shocking. And there's always a degree of manipulation in this indirect system, but I think the scale and the intensity has ratcheted it up during this current round, and in large part, that comes down to the federal member states themselves, and I think all of them are basically following the same playbook here.
So this would seem to favor then Farmajo in that most people see him as being close to three of the governors, the mayor of Mogadishu, while the Somaliland delegation seems to be split between Hashi and the Mahdi, the deputy prime minister. Do you see it that way? I mean,
that's one reason why I think the Farmajo administration has been so keen around this electoral process in terms of ensuring it doesn't kind of get away from them. So there's some element to that. But having said that, once MPs are selected, and we've seen this happen in the past where politicians and key leaders have really tried to ensure and tried to stack the deck in their favor, that there's actually a high degree of independence once it comes down to the actual voting day. So I think it's very hard to say in terms of, at this point, really one way or the other. But, I think there's a couple of candidates that will probably say, we like our chances now, and I think Farmajo will be one.
I guess the opposition, but also some of the media, has painted the characters from NISA that have been involved in lower house seats as being a bit nefarious, and the whole idea that you have security personnel running for office as being wrong. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, it's honestly a continuation. Basically, Parliament's become a house of immunity for Somalia seeking that, and we've seen this happen before. The previous Parliament had a number of warlords in it, and so I think that's continued, not just on the NISA side, but through other security officials as well. And so it's a bit damaging to see Parliament kind of recast in that sort of way, but it's really a continuation of a trend that we've already seen.
Now, do you think that the international community is going to see this as a free and fair election in the end? Is it, or is it just it doesn't really matter? They just want to get it over with?
Yeah, I think it's the latter point that is driving most consideration right now. I think there's been a lot of fatigue, a lot of frustration with this electoral process that's over a year overdue. I think everyone's just kind of looking at that light at the end of the tunnel, and basically, okay, there were some issues raised about conduct before. There was, some very small attempts perhaps to address those. Those really fell flat. And so almost a resignation at this point that the conduct is going to be what it is, that there's been a degree of manipulation in all of these indirect electoral processes that we've seen over the past decade. And so just kind of focusing on getting it over with, getting to that presidential vote, getting a fresh or new administration, and moving on with things, because this has really dragged on for quite some time.
And will the same go for the Somali people? I mean, is there a chance that there will be protest, violence, or unacceptance of this, or are the people just as tired of this process and just want to get it on with?
Yeah, I think there's a large degree of fatigue as well, but we'd have to look at some very localized specific situations. I do think you'll see some backlash or some grievance emerging from this process. It might not be immediate, it might be down the road. But essentially, the seats belong to specific subclans. They're assigned to specific subclans, but in certain cases where political interests have overridden that, some subclans feel marginalized or feel like they've been pushed out of that process, or that the seat ownership has essentially been transferred elsewhere. And so I think dealing with that in the long term might be an issue. But in terms of the wider acceptance of the election, I think, it's that same sort of sentiment that, we just want to get this over with. We want to kind of get back out of this electoral campaigning mode that's been going on, even if you talk about the lead up to this, almost 2 years. And so I think there's, a very strong sense of fatigue in wanting to get that over with.
Well, thank you for your analysis of Somalia's international relationships. Tell us how you like Maputo.
Maputo's great. It's a little hot and humid, but that's, comes with the territory. You get a nice little sea breeze as well. So yeah, very, very good little dynamic.
Thank you, Omar Mahmood from the International Crisis Group. It's once again fascinating to hear your ideas on what's going on in Somalia.